This week, we're going to be looking at internal audit. The previous week, we considered what happens in the environment around you and the importance of making sure we know all that's going on. But it's impossible to actually be effective in the environment if you are not aware of your own strengths and your own abilities, but also of your own weaknesses. As Sun Tzu said, if you know yourself, and you'll win all battles. He also stressed the importance of making many of the calculations and much analysis before the battle is fought. The general who wins the battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is fought. The general who loses makes but few calculations beforehand. It is very important for you to do full and correct analysis and have some understanding of the situation around you. So that's Sun Tzu. Over time, there is nothing to be gained from developing good strategies if the organisation is incapable of achieving them. This is a classic error. The idea that you will come up with something saying, "Oh, this is what we should do," but if you cannot do them, then there is no point to them. The old tale is of the wise owl who is asked by a tortoise how he can help him to get to win the races. He said, "Oh, you must grow legs like a rabbit and wings like an eagle." But of course, that is fine, but that is not something that can actually be done. Often said that the owl in the story is strategy, but he is not operations. But of course, operations must be aligned with strategy. What you're capable of must be at the forefront of what you say when you're designing your strategy. So within this unit, we're going to have a look at a range of tools and techniques for conducting a systematic internal review. And some of these may be familiar with those of you who have already worked in the public sector, but others are new and may have been borrowed from the public sector, from the commercial sector. So what are our objectives? Participants will be able to explain the concept of strategic capability. We are trying to get you away from the idea of just thinking about what you are good at, but what are you good at that is actually strategic? What is it that you can actually do that will be of use to you in actually achieving your aims? We'll look at the idea of core and threshold competencies and point out why it's important not to confuse the two and not to spend a lot of time enhancing competencies that are merely threshold. We'll look at the application of the tools, systematically as the internal environment. Of course, it's a little more difficult than the environmental one because it's about you trying to work out what your own organisations are like in the terms of the game. And I'll develop a prioritised and robust list of the strengths and weaknesses of your organisation. The whole point of this thing is, as last week the environment produced the threats and opportunities that can go into your TOES matrix, which we'll discuss later on. Here we're going to be looking at the strengths and weaknesses. Another priority of this lecture is to enforce the idea that the public sector is often more complex and unpredictable than the private sector due to the influence of things like political change, uncertainty, instability, and the like. And one of the main influences here, of course, is that we have multiple and competing stakeholders, as we've already mentioned, which is the primary concern of anyone operating this area. So let's have a quick outline of the lecture. We'll cover what is the need for internal analysis. Why do we need to do it? We'll try and get to use the idea of capabilities and competencies and what the differences are. We'll look at the idea of sustainable competitive advantage, which of course is a private sector idea, though we talked about the competitive environment last time. But in this case, we're really looking at you carving yourself a unique role, something that makes you as an organisation, you as an individual, make a unique offering in your field. We'll look briefly at a comprehensive internal audit tool, though I've actually mostly put that in the handouts, I think, because it's quite simple, but it takes up a lot of time, so I don't really think it's necessary to do that here. And then we'll analyse the idea of strengths and weaknesses. And I would like to actually you to think about, beyond just saying, oh, this is a strength, this is a weakness, we have to really think about the idea that some strengths are actually no good to you and some weaknesses can be ignored. And that's one of the problems that we have to make ourselves clear and clarified on what we're working on. There are plenty more tools and techniques you may choose to use, available in various of the readings and the textbooks. So let's go briefly go back to a session that we already looked at. I think it's important to recognise that in the private sector, the main resources are part of an organisation's capabilities, but actually for the public sector, there can be some external operational capabilities, but which have to be considered internal in terms of actually operating it. of being able to work. And these are things like, for instance, public money is one of the things that you're required. Okay, taxation and other income handed over to the citizen to the state authority becomes part of the state, and although it is external in some ways, we should class it as internal. The amount of money that you can raise, the amount of money your government will give you to carry out your role, what portion of the money that comes from the public, that is partly theirs. Publicly, you are given what we call legal authority, which means you have the right to pass and enforce the laws, and the idea that this should be done fairly and without favour to make sure that everyone is treated equally. That is one of the ideas that is a resource to the public, and it's often the case that certain organisations, they can risk this, they can risk throwing this resource away by the unfair and arbitrary application of the authorities and of the laws they're doing. So you must, if you wish to maintain the public on side, you must be fair in your use of legal authority. Monopoly of force. The state has a monopoly on the use of force. It reserves for itself the right to use violence to a greater and lesser degree on those that do not comply with it. These can be against criminals, against external enemies, but also to a certain extent the kind of idea of a sort of violence that is used against those who simply say try not to pay their taxes or refuse to comply with certain of the rules. It doesn't necessarily be the same level of violence as the ones, but force at the end is the basis of something that Karl Marx referred to the state as a body of armed men. As a body of armed men that were protecting one particular class in society. The state reserves power to itself, power of arrest, of inquiry, of investigation, the power to collect taxes. It must be noted that some of this power, and more of it, in fact, is being privatised. So we see certain privatised sections, for instance, this country, of the benefit system. We see privatised sections of the police force, of the prosecutorial systems. We even see private military contractors taking over some of the overseas operations. And finally, it should be noted that among the public sector, co-production, which exists in the private sector, think of bagging and scanning your own groceries at the supermarket, but co-production, the idea that the person who receives it works alongside the person who's providing the service, is very, very much part of the public sector. Some of the work is done by those who receive the service or are regular about the service. But this may include those who might not want to receive the service. So people might be things like prisoners or people who've been locked away. Or the state may try and pass other things on by encouraging us to take more precautions or adopting a different lifestyle. The state provides health education, public safety, fire prevention, etc., alongside doctors, nurses, police and ambulance and fire brigade. It asks you to actually take some responsibilities for yourself and keep the costs down. The final big question we should ask is, what is internal? We often have to include within our specification of what is internal in the public sector, the non-governmental organisation, things that you might actually think are actually external to the organisation. So we consider the public money that is provided to organisations to be internal to the organisation. But the general public funding environment is external. So the taxes that are collected become internal, but the environment in which you collect taxes and the taxes that you try and impose are external. And it's also true that many public institutions, for instance, may well find at the moment they are suffering because some of the money that's been collected from the taxation, rather than being used to the benefit of the organisations, the public, is actually now being fed back into the banks as the private sector. It's also true that some things must be considered to be internal that you might actually not be able to put a measurement or a figure on. And this is some things that we mentioned already about the idea of some sort of public trust issues and things like that. But imagine if, for instance, you're a police force. It is much easier for a police force to do its job where it has the majority of public trust. Inspector Mark Khan, Chief Inspector Mark Khan, who came to speak to the department last term, actually made the point that when he gave a talk to the lecturer, if the lecturer decided to rush him, there was nothing he could do about it. He and his own would be outnumbered. And that is the normal position for the police. So he would require people to have public trust in and public faith in the police force in order for them to be able to do their job. So that must be considered to be an internal asset of the organisation.